The storm rolled into Seattle without warning, thick sheets of cold rain pelting the diner windows with a violence that made the sky itself seem as if it were grieving. Inside, the morning crowds that usually hummed with the cheerful chatter of city life were absent, leaving the space hollow and quiet. Rowan Hale, a single father with tired eyes and hands roughened by years of hard labor, sat alone in a corner booth with a plate he could barely afford. After weeks of living off instant noodles and skipping meals to ensure his young daughter Mira had enough to eat, he had finally saved enough for a single, real breakfast, a small luxury that felt like a king's feast. But before he could even raise his fork for the first bite, the heavy diner doors swung open and a woman stumbled inside like a ghost blown in by the gale. She was soaking wet, her body trembling uncontrollably, with strands of hair plastered to her pale, tear-streaked cheeks. A profound sense of despair filled the room before she even spoke a single word. Her clothes were torn, her lips were a ghostly shade of blue, and when the waitress approached her, she whispered for help in a voice so faint it was nearly swallowed by the roar of the rain outside. Rowan didn't know why he stood up. Perhaps it was pure instinct, or perhaps it was the memory of Mira's sweet voice saying, "Daddy, helping someone is like giving them your sunshine." Whatever the reason, he walked toward the stranger and placed his warm, untouched plate in front of her. "Here," he said softly, a deep worry tugging at his heart. "You need this more than I do." The woman, who eventually murmured her name was Aravan, devoured the meal with a desperation that suggested she hadn't eaten in days, her tears mixing with the raindrops still clinging to her skin. Rowan did not pry or push for her story. He knew the heavy look of silence that follows trauma, having lived through it himself after his daughter's mother passed away. Despite his own shivering, he wrapped his jacket around her shoulders and gave her the last of his change for a future meal, knowing he would now have to skip dinner that night. 3 weeks later, the consequences of that morning began to unfold in a way Rowan could never have imagined. He received a formal, sleek envelope in the mail with embossed lettering that made his stomach knot with a rising sense of panic. Struggling single dads rarely received letters from high-end law firms for good reasons, and he immediately feared debt collectors or a lawsuit he couldn't afford. After dropping Mira off at school, he took the bus across the city to a towering glass building that seemed to swallow the daylight whole. Standing in the marble lobby in his worn jeans and fraying sleeves, he felt painfully out of place. Inside a quiet, chrome-lined conference room, 2 attorneys from the Vinn and Alder firm sat him down. Rowan stiffened, his voice trembling, as he asked if Aravan was okay. "She is safe," the older attorney replied gently. "Thanks in large part to you." They revealed that the broken woman from the diner was actually Aravan Vinn, a world-renowned photographer and the sole heir to a massive family trust. She had been running from a violent confrontation and a life of exploitation, and in her trauma, she had stripped herself of her privilege, refusing money and protection until she was left with nothing. The younger attorney leaned forward, his voice filled with respect. "Miss Vinn told us that when she truly had nothing, not even hope, you were the only person who treated her like a human being rather than a burden or a spectacle." He explained that Aravan had gone to an undisclosed recovery center to heal, but before leaving, she had instructed them to deliver a life-altering gift to Rowan. She had established a full financial grant in his and Mira's names, stating, "He gave me a meal when I only felt like a ghost, so I want to give him back his future." The grant was staggering. It covered a safe, permanent home, childcare, and 3 full years of living expenses, allowing Rowan to finally pursue the career in technical drafting he had once dreamed of but could never afford. Rowan left the firm clutching the folder, as if it were pure sunlight. The crushing weight of survival finally lifted from his back. In the months that followed, his life transformed. He moved into an apartment where the roof didn't leak, and Mira blossomed with new friends and laughter. He realized that a single act of kindness, born of instinct in a rain-soaked diner, had bridged the distance between despair and hope, proving that compassion is the most valuable currency in the world. When Rowan and Mira stepped into their new apartment, the silence was different than the one they had lived in for years. There was no sound of rain dripping through a leaky ceiling, no groaning of old walls, and no cold drafts creeping under the door. Mira ran through the rooms, her eyes wide, as she discovered a bedroom that was hers alone, filled with new books and a bed that didn't sag. Rowan sat at the small kitchen table, the same folder from the lawyers resting before him, feeling the crushing weight of survival finally lift from his shoulders. For the first time since his wife had passed, he didn't have to calculate the cost of every calorie or worry if the lights would stay on through the month. That night, as he tucked Mira in, she whispered, "Daddy, did the lady from the diner give us her sunshine?" Rowan choked back a sob of gratitude and replied, "Yes, sweetie, she gave us more than we ever dreamed of." In the months that followed, Rowan threw himself into his studies in technical drafting, a field he had abandoned years ago to work manual labor just to keep them afloat. The calluses on his hands began to soften, replaced by the precise grip of a drafting pencil and the glow of a computer screen. He was no longer the man with the tired, haunted eyes. He was a student, a father, and a man with a future. Mira blossomed at her new school, no longer the quiet girl in frayed clothes, but a child who laughed loudly and dreamed of becoming an artist. Rowan often returned to the diner, not out of hunger, but as a silent tribute to the place where his life had changed. He would pay for the meals of strangers, continuing the sunshine Mira had spoken of, knowing that a single plate of food could be the difference between a person's end and their new beginning. 2 years had passed when Rowan received a second letter, but this time it was not from a lawyer. It was a simple, handwritten note on high-quality paper, inviting him to a gallery opening in the heart of the city. When he arrived, dressed in a sharp suit he could now afford, he saw her. Aravind stood at the center of the room, radiant and strong, surrounded by her breathtaking photography. When their eyes met, the room seemed to fade away. She walked toward him, no longer the ghost from the storm, and took his hands. "I saw your progress through the firm," she whispered, her voice no longer cracking like glass. Rowan looked around at the walls and saw a single framed photograph of the diner in the rain, titled The Turning Point. "You saved me that day, Rowan," she said softly. "I didn't just give you a future. You reminded me that the world was worth living."